We're gonna wait one more minute, but thank you so much for joining us. And it's 11 a.m., so let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the 300 people that are joining us. And you know, when there are 300 people joining a webinar, I am telling myself that I know how to pick the topics and the guest speakers, probably. So thank you very much for joining us for this webinar about the Ontario line. And I invited Steve Monroe, a transit expert and blogger, to talk, who follows that very closely, I have to say. He knows all the details, to talk about this subject. Now, you already know that our webinars are 30 minutes long, and it's not a lot of time to cover the topic. So Stephen kindly offered to, first of all, he will, before we get 50 questions of, can you share the deck? So Stephen kindly already proposed to share the deck on his blog, which I will put a link to in the chat box, and you can access it there. Also, the recording of this webinar will be available. So let's get started. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to share the screen. Steven, I'm going to mute myself. Wait. The stage is yours, Stephen.
Okay. I see you, not me, so I'm assuming that the rest of the world can actually see my smiling face here. I'll stare at the screen whether I'm online or not. So this is a really high-speed tour of the Ontario line. I thought I had 45 minutes, and now I see I only have 30. So boy, we'll get from one end of the line to the other faster than the trains do, or will if the line is ever open. Just as a quick overview, I'm going to spend a tiny amount of time talking about where the Ontario line came from, then do a station-by-station tour along the line. And at the end, there's a group of issues generally about planning for rapid transit that tend to get lost in the shuffle when people are looking sort of one site at a time and what their local issue is. And I'd like to talk a bit about them at the end if I haven't completely run out of time. So the image you've got right now is a map showing the relief line, which is in dark blue. That was the original downtown relief line proposed by the City of Toronto, at least the part they were working on. And the light blue turquoise line is the Ontario line running from Exhibition Place to the Science Centre up at Don Mills and Eglinton. The line changes color in a few places because the blue portions are underground and the pink portions are above ground. I'll get a bit more detail in that later on. One of the big problems the downtown relief line always had politically was the name downtown, because it gave the impression to suburban politicians that this wasn't for them, and so it kept getting pushed to the back of the pack. The subway had filled up on a couple of occasions, the late 80s, also early in the 2000s, and it really wasn't until the pressure for the Richmond Hill extension of the Yonge subway made it absolutely imperative that there be more capacity in the downtown, that the TTC finally stopped saying, oh, we can just fit more people on the Yonge subway, and embraced the idea of a relief line. This map is one that Metrolinx likes to show often when they talk about how their proposal is so much better than the original city proposal. And there's a kind of Metrolinx mythology that they were the ones that thought up the idea of going to Eglinton, but that's really not true. Can I have the next slide, please? Click. There it is. This is the TTC's 1969 plan, and there are actually earlier plans that have a lot of this on them. And what you'll see, among many other things, is that nice red line going along Queen Street and up the Don vaguely. I won't get into details, but basically it goes to Don Mills and Eglinton. So the idea of going to Don Mills and Eglinton has been around a long time. This map is also kind of interesting because it talks about the proposed town centers in various locations and the proposed zoo. So this is back in the era when the suburbs, a lot of that area that we now think of as being full of housing was farmland. I remember walking around in northern Scarborough, passing sheep grazing in a field by the side of the road on Finch Avenue. So this is the kind of the change the city has seen over a half century. Can I have the third slide, please? This is in 2012 when the study got underway seriously. You'll notice that the downtown relief east included an extension to Eglinton. And at this point, the line was going to come into downtown along King Street. That subsequently got shifted to come in via Queen. And I won't get into the politics of why Queen Street and that whole idea of a city hall station on that. That's one of those lovely things where people wrestle over alignments and come up with reasons. But in any event, the point is that in 2012, when this was basically a city/TTC project, it was going to go to Eglinton. Because the project was big, the work was divided into pieces between the city, who took responsibility for the part south of Danforth, and Metrolinx, who took responsibility for the piece north. Can I have the next slide? Metrolinx never really got beyond the corridor selection process, and this was an incredibly time-consuming and rather boring part of environmental assessments as they used to be conducted. And it usually took about a year to decide that the route that we figured was the best place to go really was the best place to go. And they would investigate every other conceivable option and frankly waste a lot of the public's time and consultants' time looking at non-viable options. I also frankly have the sense that Metrolinx was dragging its feet, and they were just as happy that when the election came along in 2018, there was a kind of a tools down for the period of the election, and then they really never picked the tools back up again. The other important point about this map is you'll notice it doesn't stop at Eglinton, it goes to Shepherd, because Metrolinx had done a study showing that if the line on Don Mills went all the way to Shepherd, they would actually have a huge impact on reducing traffic on the Yonge line, which of course was the whole purpose of this thing, to divert traffic away from Yonge so that there would be room for riders from Richmond Hill. So in 2018, we got a new premier, and with the new premier, we got a new transit plan, including enabling legislation that substantially shortened the process of studying new lines, almost to the point that basically you make an announcement and you'll have pro forma consultation to kind of say to people, oh, what color would you like the tiles in the stations to be? But we're going to build it the way we're going to build it. And that has been responsible for no end of problems on several Metrolinx projects in the last 4 years. I will not go into those in gory detail. For more, read articles on my site and in the Main Street Press. And then we go to slide 5. So I don't like text-based slides, but this is one where I really don't have much alternative. It's just a quick overview of how the contracts for the line have been broken up. They learned their lesson from Eglinton, where it was the one contract to eat them all contract for the entire Eglinton project with many, many subcontractors. That has its problems because there's all the finger pointing. You've got a huge one big contract to manage rather than smaller ones. And another big problem was that each of the proponents, when they were bidding, had to build in their own collection of equipment suppliers for systems that were going to be common regardless of who actually built the thing. So on the Ontario line, there's a collection of early works that I'll talk about shortly. There are 2 civils projects. One is called South Civils, which will be the tunnel and stations west of the Don, and the intent is to award that contract this fall. There's the North Tunnels, which won't be awarded for 2 years. That's the tunnels and stations east of the Don River and up to Eglinton. And then there's the RSSOM contract, which is short for Rolling Stock Systems Operations and Maintenance, and that's pretty much everything that isn't the tunnel and the stations. And that will be awarded also this fall. But what it does is having it as a separate contract decouples it from the structural contract of building the line and actually makes the bidding and project management simpler. The big point in all of this is that for some time now, Richmond Hill really has wanted a subway. York Region wants the Yonge subway to go to Richmond Hill. There's massive development planned at Richmond Hill, but there's no capacity on line 1 to carry the riders. So it's absolutely essential that they get the Ontario line built and open, and 2030-ish, essentially 2 lines will open very close to each other, the Ontario line and the planned Richmond Hill extension. It's funny, Metrolinx used to take a rather hard line with their P3 partners, and you've probably all read about the legal battles they've had with Crosslinks, who are building the Eglinton line. But now they're taking a more collegial approach and saying, you know, we really should share the risk with you guys. And in response, the construction industry is somewhat more warm-hearted to Metrolinx, because Metrolinx isn't basically doing coming in with a big stick and saying, you build this, you take all the responsibility, and we'll just sit back and collect all the kudos for this wonderful line. That's a definite improvement, long overdue for Metrolinx to not be quite as contentious in their handling of contractors. Now I hope they can actually manage to do it with the public on consultation issues. So can we go to the next slide for early works? Early works, this is work that is going to be undertaken starting this year, mainly to deal with conflicts between GO Transit and the Ontario line, where they share rights of way, as well as to prep the site that will be the launch for the tunnel boring machines. Working from west to east, there is the red Exhibition Place, where there'll be a joint station between the Ontario line and GO. Then on the east side, Corktown, the yellow circle will be both a major station, but also that's where the tunnel boring machines will launch. And that will be similar to the launch site that anyone who knows the Eglinton project will be familiar with from the area around Thorncliffe and Eglinton, or Black Creek Drive and Eglinton on the west end. A little bit further east, the blue box is the bridge over the Don River, and then the orange circle, which is the East Harbour Transit Hub, about which more later. And finally, the green stripe, which is the shared corridor between East Harbour and Gerrard, which I will also talk about later on. So that's all the stuff that's planned to start this fall. Well, actually, some of it more this summer, but anyway, it's 2022 work. So now let's go into the tour, and can we go to the next slide for Exhibition Station? So these are 2 Metrolinx drawings. The first one shows the general overview of the line between Exhibition and Queen and Spadina, and the second one is the close-up of Exhibition Station. And this has to be majorly rearranged so that all of the 4 tracks on the Lakeshore Corridor will be able to stop there rather than just the local tracks, as well as the Ontario line tracks. The part in green that's shown is the Ontario line, basically the ramp down to a portal, and then you'll see at the right-hand side of the slide, it becomes 2 blue lines, and that's the underground tunnel, so that from that point eastward, the line is underground. The red loop south of that is the existing streetcar loop where the Bathurst cars and Harbourfront cars loop around, and you can also see the Dufferin loop on the west side. Later on, I'm going to talk about this area because a big problem with this map is that it only presents basically Exhibition Station as if it kind of exists in a vacuum from everything around it. And that's an important planning issue that is often missed in many of these studies, is not looking at the wider context for new stations and new lines. Next slide, please. Something that is happening at several stations along the line is Infrastructure Ontario is planning major developments on land that the province either owns or has acquired for the project. And this is an example of what they're looking at building along the north side of the rail corridor. East from Dufferin is the first shot, and the second is looking west towards Exhibition Station. Anybody who knows what Exhibition Station looks like right now knows there is not a concourse over top of the tracks. That's one of the major additions that's planned, so that people can get back and forth between the Ontario line and the GO tracks without having a complex. At one point, you go under the tracks to get to the north side right now, and this is not a very good way to serve the station. It's much harder to put in escalators and elevators. The planned developments there are 2 buildings at the west end, 21 and 19 stories, and at the east end, 2 19-story buildings. So let's go now to King Bathurst and Queen Spadina. The next slide, please. King Bathurst Station will be mined out from the two corners, northeast and southeast of King and Bathurst. And then after the station is built, the facades of the existing buildings will be kept, but two towers will be built on top of them. They are intended to be two 25-story towers sitting on top of obviously much lower buildings. The intent is that both here and at Queen and Spadina, which we'll come to shortly, the whole construction project will be done from the side of the road without disrupting surface traffic, and particularly without disrupting the heavy streetcar service on King and Bathurst streets. So now we can go up to Queen and Spadina. Next slide, please. There we are. Very similar situation, two access shafts, this time on the northeast and the southwest corners of the intersection, and the existing Bank of Commerce building on the north side will be preserved as a facade above which a building 15 stories will rise. Southwest will be a 14-story building. So you can start to see a pattern here that where Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario have land, they want to recapture some of the value of the land and obviously offset the cost of construction with new buildings. Now, it will be nowhere near the total cost of the line, but it's a contribution. And well, in theory, they're contributing to the housing problem or relieving the housing problem. But what we don't know is how much of this will actually be quote unquote affordable, and whether this is just more nice big towers downtown for investors and people who can actually afford to live in brand new buildings at market rates rather than at rates that address a lower income group of people. Now we go over to Osgoode Station, and this is a rather delicate location. It's interesting, Metrolinx has not produced any detailed diagrams of this station beyond the map and an illustration of the property requirements for the two accesses. Like Queen Spadina and King Bathurst, it will be mined out from the corners, but the big problem is on the northeast corner of University and Queen, which some of you may know is the park on the south side of Osgoode Hall. And a good deal of mature greenery right in the middle of downtown will be removed in order to provide for the access shaft and the new station entrance. Some of the lands east of Osgoode Hall will also be used as a construction staging area for this station. I'm frankly surprised that the Law Society of Upper Canada hasn't been more public about what's happening to the property outside their building, but they've been kind of silent on the issue. And if they're silent much longer, it's going to be a fait accompli, and those trees will disappear. Another problem, and something we don't know yet, and it'll be interesting when I get over to Queen and Yonge, is how complex the interchange will be between Osgoode Station, the existing University Avenue Osgoode Station, and the Ontario line, which will be some distance below it, and how long it will actually take to make a transfer between the two lines and how convenient that transfer will be. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the greenery, the upper left-hand corner is the northeast corner of Queen and University, where the new station entrance will be. That photo was taken in August of this year, or probably of last year. I'm still mentally in 2021. The picture on the right is a proposal from a group called Public Work, who have a scheme to reconfigure University Avenue with a much expanded park on the east side of the street, essentially moving what is now a rather sterile Central Plaza on University Avenue to the east and merging it with the sidewalk, so that really University Avenue was totally transformed from the kind of cold environment it is today. Obviously, if Metrolinx takes over a chunk of the south end of it, this doesn't quite land on Queen Street the same way as it would with the station entrance better integrated into the location. Now we have some real fun, and we go over to Queen and Yonge. As you've probably read, Queen and Yonge is going to be closed for 4.5 years. Yes, years. While the station is built between James Street and Victoria Street. The essential problem is that there is no place to take a side of the road off-street position and mine in from the side, so they're going to dig down from the top. While this is underway, the streetcar line, the Queen streetcars will divert westbound via Richmond and eastbound via Adelaide. And yes, in case you're wondering about streetcars traveling south on York, which is currently one way, York is going to be changed to two-way so that the streetcars can make that diversion. Next slide, please. A big issue at Queen and Yonge is that it is a very long roundabout transfer between the Yonge line and the Queen line. Unlike Bloor and Yonge, where you basically go up or down one level to get between the Bloor subway and the Yonge subway, at Queen and Yonge, you'll walk east or west over to almost Victoria Street or almost to James Street just to reach the stair tower, elevator, escalators, however you're going to get up and down, to get down to the Ontario line, which is much deeper below. And Metrolinx, it's interesting that Metrolinx is really big on convenient transfers to their own trains and GO Transit interchanges, but the interchange with the subway is quite another matter. And so this is not exactly, your speedy just hop off one train and hop on another transfer between lines at Queen and Yonge. And I worry that the same situation will apply over at University Avenue, although we still haven't seen a design for that station. The original, just as a point of interest, the original station, when this was going to be the relief line, would have been a level higher, still not immediately under the subway, because the station would have been further west, over nearer City Hall. So it would have replaced a ride all the way down to this very deep station with a slightly shallower station, but further away from Yonge Street. So either way, the transfer connection between the two lines would not have been just a quick up and down one level. So let's go over to Sherbourne Street. This is a relatively straightforward station that will be built off street in the park. That's the existing park on the north side of Queen, east of the Armories at Moss Park and to Sherbourne Street. It'll be an open cut station, which of course is easy to build because you don't have to do any complex mining, just basically dig down to the tunnel that will already have been built there. This is an area that doesn't have any planned intensified development around it from Infrastructure Ontario, but there was already redevelopment has worked its way north from King Street to Richmond, and there are already development proposals in the works for the land along Queen Street. So this is an area that's definitely going to change substantially in the next decade as people say, oh, look, subway station, and develop the property around it, as will happen in many other places. And now we go over to Corktown, this is a kind of a complex site. The picture on the left, north, is at the top, and you can see there are two blocks involved in this, running from King Street down below Front Street to the Esplanade, which is at the park that's right at the bottom of the picture. The slide on the right is looking sort of southeast, so you see the same park as that green space with new towers in it. That's basically the same space as the space on the left-hand slide. The line will come down west of Berkeley Street and then turn east and go through the Distillery District and eventually surface to cross the river, which we'll come to. This site is planned to have five towers on them, two 46-story towers on the north block and a 46 plus 25-story residential and a 24-story office building on the south block. That's the current proposal from Infrastructure Ontario. The south block will initially be used as the tunnel boring launch site for the tunnel drive across downtown. Now, one of the things that comes up here, you can tell, of course, we're at the Distillery District, and those who know the area, Distillery Loop is in the upper left-hand corner this is the right-hand slide. And a question that comes up very often is, why no station at Cherry? And this is an interesting question. Let's go to the next slide and we can see Cherry from another point of view. This is looking down on the GO Transit storage yard between Cherry Street and the Don River. And you can see Distillery Loop at the left-hand side of the picture. There is a new development planned where that parking lot is. And an obvious issue, aside from the fact that Cherry Street is very close to East Harbour Station, if you were going to build a station there, you both have to have the line kind of level out for a distance so you can build one, and it would be nice to integrate it with the new building. I don't think either of these is going to happen, But just for those who are wondering why no Cherry Street Station, that's about all we know so far. The proximity to East Harbour is the real kicker there, even though, of course, East Harbour is on the other side of the river. The purple box in the map or the river is a bridge, which you can see the proposed drawing of in the bottom of the bottom slide there. And this is one of the early works, the bridge and the works at East Harbour that Metrolinx is planning to undertake quite soon. Unfortunately, the bridge doesn't have the architectural grace that some of the new bridges planned down in the waterfront further south have, but that's the bridge that's proposed. It's also a rather long single span, although I suspect there's a pillar or two in there somewhere. Let's see. Now let's go to East Harbour. East Harbour. This basically is a node that has been, I wouldn't say gerrymandering, but it's been anything you propose to build through downtown has to serve East Harbour, because the intent has always been to have a very large development there. And the development that Cadillac Fairview is proposing, and that's their drawing on the bottom. The development that Cadillac Fairview is proposing is even more dense than what was originally planned there. Great Gulf was originally going to develop this site. And there's going to be a lot of people here. It's intended to have 926,000 square meters of commercial space and 302,000 square meters of residential space. That's a lot of people, no matter how you count it. An intriguing problem will be what the market is for commercial office space in the next decade or so, depending on what happens with repopulation of downtown, work from home, all that sort of stuff. And it would not surprise me one bit to see some of this commercial space morph into residential proposals, depending on what the market does. You can see on the left hand of that cluster of towers, the proposed station and transit hub, which has the 4 GO tracks with 2 platforms between them, and the Ontario Line tracks and platform on the north side. Let's go to the next slide, and we can see the area in a plan view. The important thing you can see here is that a lot gets changed around. Broadview Avenue is to be extended south, so it becomes part of the transit hub at East Harbour Station. And the plan is to extend the Broadview streetcar south and connect in with future line in the East Harbour. The other changes, there are many other changes in this area, which it's not really obvious if you don't know it well. But for example, there is a realignment of Cherry Street, which will actually occur this spring. There's the new bridges for the Don Valley the DVP Gardner connection, realignment of Queens Quay, realignment of Lakeshore Boulevard, new bridge over the Don River for Lakeshore Boulevard. A lot of stuff is changing down here. And of course, the big one is Villiers Island and the rerouting of the Don River by Waterfront Toronto. All of this is happening over the next 2 or 3 years. Then we go to Riverside, and yes, there is Riverside. This is a really, really contentious area, and I am not going to go into all the details. You can read about them elsewhere. I will mention in the interest of full disclosure that I have worked with residents groups in this area on an alternative proposed alignment, which Metrolinx has rejected. But just to let you know, I had a hand in that, so I'm not entirely disinterested. I actually live at Broadview and Danforth, so it's not like I'm one of the immediate property owners, but I certainly am interested in what happens at down in Riverside. By the way, the original name of the station was Leslieville because the Metrolinx planners didn't know that this area is actually called Riverside, so they called it Leslieville. Now it's got a hyphenated station name. That's kind of why it's Riverside/Leslieville. Anyhow, the big issue here is that Metrolinx owns a corridor that's considerably wider than they're currently using. And the corridor is built on a berm, meaning that the land slopes up, as you can see in the photograph on the on the bottom of the slide. The land slopes up and it's treed. So the corridor is kind of nicely screened and has a more park-like feeling that goes through. Now, if we scroll down to or I'm scrolling, you're paging, sorry. What's going to happen to this is a really massive change. You can see the berm in the green But you can also see on top of the green, the level that the tracks are at right now. The intent is to raise the corridor so that bridges along this corridor can be raised to a clearance of 5 meters over all the streets they cross. So the corridor will both, with the feel of it, it will widen out to the full width of the corridor with retaining walls on either side. The trees that are there now will be cut down, and there will be 6 tracks abreast, 4 for GO Transit and 2 for the Ontario line. Needless to say, the locals are not pleased, this has been a matter of much contention. And yet Metrolinx basically says, nope, this is what we're going to build. This is our proposal, and we're pretty much stuck with it unless somebody comes along. Who knows? A change of government in June. This isn't supposed to. A lot of this isn't supposed to be set in concrete until later this year, so there may be a chance to rearrange this. But I'm not holding my breath. Another issue is that Metrolinx says, yes, we'll replace the trees, but there's no guarantee that the new trees will go anywhere near where the old trees were. And so exactly what this is going to look like when they're finished with it, we're not sure. So let's move north to Gerrard Street, which is the next station up the line. There's Gerrard, the double bridge across Carlaw and Gerrard. And the 2 lines diverge at this point. The Ontario line sort of slides off to the northwest and isn't sitting on the rail corridor. The expansion of the GO line to 4 tracks can be done with the existing bridges, so there's no construction there, and they will stay as they are. There was talk occasionally, even on the announcement for this webinar, there was a GO Transit symbol on Gerrard Street Station, but that was from an earlier version of the line when there was to be a smart track station at Gerrard, and that has disappeared basically because it won't fit. Now, the north side of Gerrard, people who know the area will know there's Gerrard Square Mall, which extends between Carlaw and Pape, and this is an obvious potential redevelopment site. It's just not a provincial redevelopment site, and so it doesn't show up as a development proposal in the Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario materials. Let's see, I'm at 11:30 now, and I'm only at Gerrard Street. Boy, we have to fly along here.
You know what? The audience is very engaged. The numbers are really good. I'm not going to stop you, so please continue.
All right. I'll have to supercharge the trains. Actually, there's less detail from here north, because Metrolinx has concentrated on an awful lot of the design work and public consultation with the area to the south. So there's actually less to see as we go north. That's the alignment north from Gerrard through Pape and Danforth station. The Danforth, obviously an interchange with the Danforth subway, then Cosburn across the Don River through Thorncliffe Park, Flemington Park, and the Science Center. So let's go to the Danforth station, Pape and Danforth station slide. Originally, oh yes, sorry, I didn't realize you weren't looking at the map well. I was talking. So the map on the left is the north end of the line, the alignment, and the map on the right is a close-up of Pape and Danforth with north to the right. Originally, the line was planned to go straight up Pape, but it has been shifted to the east at Danforth and to the west at Cosburn, so the station construction doesn't require basically digging up Pape Avenue the way that the crosstown construction dug up Eglinton Avenue at many locations along its route. We have no details yet of the interchange at Pape Station between the 2 subways. And again, this will be a big issue because relief of the Danforth subway, and by way of it, the Yonge subway, depends on people making transfer connections here. And if this transfer connection isn't as simple and fast as possible, it will discourage people from making the connection. So can we move up to Cosburn now? Cosburn Station, as I said, has been shifted from its original location under Pape Avenue to the west side of Pape. And it's in an area which is entirely residential. There's a bit of commercial on Pape itself, but the areas east and west are residential. The view on the lower view, you can see all of the land west of Pape is a high-rise cluster that extends over to Broadview. To the east of Pape is low-rise, and it will be interesting to see what kind of pressure there is on the area around Pape Station, Cosburn Station, given that there are provincial guidelines about increasing density at stations through what are called major transit station areas. And it's an exercise the city is going through right now, figuring out what the zoning should look like around subway stations. Cosburn is a good example of what would basically be a minor station, and yet it will have a major effect on the neighborhood that it sits in. So then we go up to the Don Valley Crossing. The line will go straight north up Mitten Place, basically continuing the line of Pape Avenue, pop out of a portal into the Don River, and cross on a bridge to get across the valley. The alignment has been changed a bit from the original scheme, both for simplification, and it also is affected by the way the line runs through Thorncliffe Park. There will be 4 houses taken at the north end of Minton Place, and I know the residents of that area are concerned about that it only be four houses, and also just how extensive the construction will be, what will be the effect on the houses that are left nearby. So it will be a bridge across the Don River, and it's shown in two renderings there, both from the air and from the side. I should mention as we go past, this is just west of the existing Leaside Bridge, which everybody knows. And the question always comes up, why are they not going across the Leaside Bridge the way the subway goes across the viaduct at Bloor Street? And the reason for this is that the Leaside Bridge was not built with provision for a lower deck. It did have extra steel in it for a streetcar line that was going to be built up to the Leaside Industrial District in the 1920s, but that extra structural support was used to widen the bridge decades ago. Also, the curves at the ends of the bridge would be too tight for this line, and so that's why a new bridge straight across the river and then a shallower turn into Thorncliffe Park, as we will see in the next slide. Blink, there we go. So you can see the line coming across sort of just south of Overley and Millwood, and then running along the north side of Overley Boulevard in front of the buildings to Thorncliffe Park Drive West, where there'll be a station, and then turning north, and that's a big change from the original plan to go straight along Overley, turning north just west of the Costco building, which is that gray building in the right-hand side of the slide. This is going to be an elevated structure, and that's a Metrolink slide. That's not my slide, and they're basically making virtue of necessity and saying, well, we can make a nice attractive space under the elevated, and they're using the SkyTrain in Richmond as an example. What they're not showing here is exactly what the relationship between this structure and the existing buildings along the north side of Thorncliffe Park are. And they're also not showing the massing of Thorncliffe Park Station, which obviously will be much larger than 2 running tracks for a guideway. So these are details which I'm sure everyone is dying to see, but which Metrolinx has not yet published. And let's go now to the maintenance facility, which is the next spot up. The reason for changing the alignment here was to connect with the proposed location of a maintenance facility for the line. And this also was a very contentious decision. There's an existing low-rise business park at the north end of Thorncliffe Park, which you can see in kind of the upper left quadrant of the photo. And basically the people whose businesses are here and the neighborhood found out that this was to be taken for the maintenance yard on the day when Metrolink scheduled the first public meeting, which also happened to be a major religious holiday for this neighborhood. Metrolink sometimes scores own goals, which they should really, frankly, try harder. There was a lot of fighting about this, and they seem to have come to a saw-off where there'll be a community center. The mosque was planning to relocate anyway, but the community center and mosque will be relocated to a building on Overley. It is not yet clear whether all of the businesses that want to relocate will be able to relocate into the new building, and this is still something of a point of contention, and it's basically a sore point between the community and Metrolinx because of the way they dropped this out of the sky rather than consulting with everybody in advance of making the announcement of the site. There are two sections to the maintenance facility. One is the train storage area, which is on that existing business park, and the other is the actual maintenance building that is up off of Beth Nielsen Drive, and that area currently has a low-rise self-storage complex on it, so it's not like something that's going to be particularly missed. Thorncliffe Park is an obvious location for redevelopment, but again, it's not government land, and so all that parking in front of Thorncliffe Park, one kind of scratches one head to say, right across the street from the subway station, hey, I suspect you'll see development proposals there. Flemington Park Station is another quote unquote minor station in the sense it doesn't have a bus loop, it doesn't really have much around it. It's at the southeast corner of the Science Center, whose parking lot you can see kind of shaded out in the picture. And the alignment of the line, of course, has changed because now instead of coming along Overlea Boulevard, the line comes further north and crosses through the Don Valley to get to Don Mills Road. There are issues with this station and with the Science Center station further north that I will come to a bit later, having to do with pressure for redevelopment of Flemington Park, which has a lot of mid-rise buildings that have been there for quite a while, moderate rental buildings, and which may in fact be threatened by the development that's triggered. It's going to be triggered by opening a new rapid transit line. Finally, we get up to Science Center Station, and originally this was going to be on the southwest corner of Don Mills and Eglinton, but it's been relocated so that the station building is directly over the bus loop, which has already been built for the Crosstown line. The picture in the lower right, essentially, it's a Metrolinx picture of Don Mills and Eglinton with the Crosstown, but with nothing else, which is a kind of odd way to look at it because all of those corners are going to be redeveloped by somebody or other. And so that will be a forest of high rises rather than nice green open space and parking lots the way it looks here. If we go to the next slide, we will see this is the huge development. You're looking east on Eglinton here. That's the street that crosses from the middle center, the bottom center of the slide off to the right. That's Eglinton Avenue, crossing Don Mills Road in the distance. That land used to be IBM/Celestica, and there is a very, very large development underway now, both commercial and residential property. Winford Drive will be extended around the development and will connect into the old interchange with Eglinton Avenue that was actually the IBM access to their site. You want to talk about transit-oriented development. This is really transit-oriented development. The corner of Don Mills and Eglinton will have this on it, but also there is a proposed Creatio building that's partly affordable, partly market housing on the southwest corner, along with a new school for the TDSB. There are also proposals for the other two corners, which are in various stages of being talked about or actively being pursued. So a corner which is now very flat and very green is going to be surrounded by high-rise buildings. This is a major junction, of course, of the Eglinton line and the future Ontario line. So here we are at the end of the line, and I've only taken 40 minutes, which is actually slightly longer than the train will take to get from the exhibition to Science Center. I'll just very quickly touch on a few other things. You can read, I'll leave a lot of the reading of this for people who pick up the presentation on my web, the longer version of the presentation on my website. An important thing is that the purpose of the Ontario line from Metrolinx's point of view has morphed a lot. And they now talk a lot about relieving overcrowding at Union Station. Remember Union Station? They're now worried that there's going to be so much service into Union Station that they won't be able to handle it all, and they want to offload at Exhibition and at East Harbour onto the Ontario line. Whether people will actually make this transfer, given that they're one station away from where they're going anyway, remains to be seen. And of course, there's the other issue of fare integration between GO and TTC, so that it doesn't cost you an extra $3 just to change from GO to the Ontario line. Another thing I want to talk about is transit-oriented communities, and that's the next slide, I believe. Click, yes. I'm going to make a somewhat contentious statement here. Density does not equal demand. It's kind of accepted wisdom that you sort of put a dot on a map and then you build lots of buildings around it and whoop, magically you have a full subway line. Doesn't work like that. people who live in a building don't use the subway line unless it goes where they want to go. There are issues with walk-ins, there are issues with other competing services, and of course, one of the other competing services are highways, and a good example of that are the stations along Shepherd, which, yeah, they've got a subway line, but they've also got the 401 and the DVP. And equally, feeder services are very important. And a good example of that, the Danforth subway does not have high-rise development at every station, and yet it's full. And so the reason for this, of course, is the Danforth subway is fed from the east by some high-rise, but not much, and a lot of feeder buses at Victoria Park, Warden, and Kennedy stations. So this is probably worth a discussion in its own right, which I won't bore you with now. You can read the text and leave comments on my website. But basically, the province is setting up to implement ministerial zoning orders, or MZOs, to put in permissions for a lot of density around subway stations. That is not necessarily going to generate subway demand if the people who live in those buildings work somewhere the subway doesn't serve. This is particularly important for subway stations in the outer suburbs, where a lot of the jobs are in places like Pickering, York Region, Peel Region, where there is no subway line. The other point about concentration is that jobs concentrate ridership a lot more than residences do, because jobs are a common point everyone is going to, and they're easy to serve with transit, as in King and Bay. Finally, the one last thing I'll talk about, well, two things that are related. Areas around stations and the effect of building new transit. The first one is Liberty Village, which is the next slide. Blink. My apologies for the quick and dirty drawing here, but the important thing about this, Liberty Village is a bigger area than just the immediate area around Exhibition Station. The high-rise development now extends all the way to Queen Street and will likely go further eventually. And of course, it extends from Dufferin Street east over to Bathurst Street. You cannot serve an area that large from one station. And so to think of Exhibition Station as quote unquote serving Liberty Village is a bit of an exaggeration. What I've shown here, the yellow circle is the 500-meter radius, which is considered the walking distance radius. The longer line that goes further north is the 800-meter circle, which is kind of if you actually get to walk in a straight line, which is difficult to do because the railway's in the way. But if you get to walk in a straight line, that's an 800-meter distance. People who live in these buildings have a choice of the Queen car, the King car, the Dufferin bus, the Ossington bus, the Bathurst/Harbour front cars, and oh, by the way, the Ontario line, as well as a smart track/GO station to be built at King and Atlantic. So a really important thing when you're planning for an area, don't just talk about where your project's going to have a station. Talk about all the other stations that are around in the area and how collectively they'll provide service to an area. Finally, a point I wanted to make, and I talked about it earlier when I was talking about Flemington Park Station, and this is the last slide. Last slide, except for the thank you slide, of course. Nope. Oh, we can go past that one because I've actually sort of covered that in a way. Flemington Park, both the stations, the two circles here are at Flemington Park Station and Science Centre Station. And all of that area in the rectangle bounded by Don Mills, Eglinton, the DVP, and the hydro corridor that runs along the south edge of that picture is within 800 meters of a rapid transit station. If you only want to go 500 meters, Deauville Lane, which runs up about 2/3 of the way across that square, that's the 500-meter mark. Everything in that area is subject to redevelopment pressure because of the fact you've got new rapid transit going there. And there are already condo developments proposed, some of which will replace existing low-rise buildings. So this is a really serious issue for the city. Transit-oriented development's a nice idea, but if it starts displacing low-rise, moderate income rental buildings, that's not quite such a good idea after all. It's kind of interesting. There are two proposals that I was looking at yesterday, one of which on Rushford, where those buildings are on the south side, is a replacement of low-rise. One of them down on Saint Denis, where it says 25 Saint Denis Drive, That's going to do infill around an existing building. So that existing building will not be lost, whereas the buildings up on Rochefort will be. The whole question of how Flemington Park redevelops is going to be very interesting over the next 10 years. And it's a big challenge for the city not to lose the moderate income housing that's here. And so, thank you for listening to me for, my God, 3/4 of an hour.
We definitely have some questions. So now it's 11 to 12. Let's take it until noon with questions. And then just so you know, guys, Steve is kindly, when we discuss, there are going to be probably gazillions questions. You can continue the discussion through his blog. So if you know, and his email is also available there. So
the article isn't up yet, but I'll put it up after.
Yeah. I mentioned that in the chat that the article will be available later today. So one thing that I'm going to bundle some of the questions into one question because I already reviewed the questions. So can we discuss timeline and timeline like east of East Harbour and west of East Harbour, and how realistic is the timeline anyway?
Well, okay, let's do west first, because that's the first piece. There are, as I mentioned, the early works that some of which will launch this spring, including work at Exhibition Station, the work around East Harbour Station and the transit hub, and the GO Transit Yard, basically to get GO Transit out of the way so that the Ontario line can be built. And I'm just seeing a question from John Sewell that popped up then. Anyway, we'll go west, so there'll be early works this spring and summer. The contract for the construction of the western segment from the river west to the exhibition is to be let this fall. So and then they have to mobilize. They got to buy tunnel boring machines and do all that. So the construction will actually start probably until about 2024. Is the year when things really get serious. And you get things, for example, like the start date for the Queen and Yonge construction. Let me just scroll back here. I have the dates here somewhere. Yes, May 23 to November 27 is the that's the closing window for the Queen and Yonge intersection and surrounding area. So it varies different places along the line, but basically things get really serious by about 2024. East of the river, the contract isn't even to be let for the civils work until fall 2024, which means construction won't start until 2025 sometime. However, the piece between East Harbour and Gerrard is the GO Transit shared corridor, and Metrolinx already has approval to rearrange that corridor for their GO expansion plans. So some of the work for the GO expansion will occur on that corridor, even though the contract for the Ontario line will not have been let yet.
Can we talk, and you kind of covered it station by station, but above ground and underground, what is maybe the percentage, or if you want to review it, the alignment as a whole, kind of?
Sure. Well, actually, if you could go back to the very first slide, which has the map. Okay. On this slide, everything in pink is above ground. Everything in blue is underground. So Exhibition Station and the portal, of course, just east of Exhibition, are at grade. Between the Don River and Gerrard is, well, it's either at grade or elevated, depending on whether you're standing on the rail corridor or standing on a street nearby. But basically, it's at the same elevation as the rail corridor between the river and Gerrard Station. Then it goes underground to go up Pape, emerges at the Don River at the north end of Pape Minton Place, crosses the Don on a bridge, and runs on an elevated structure through Thorncliffe Park and up to the Science Centre.
Okay. Question about trees in Osgoode Station.
Yes.
At Osgoode Station, are there any credible alternative options for building the station that would avoid destroying the mature trees at Osgoode Hall?
Well, there are two issues sort of overlapping here. One is the original relief line station that was proposed would have been further east. So instead of the box lying from just east of University Avenue over to Simcoe Street, it would have stretched from just west of University over to York Street, and the eastern entrance and access shaft would have been on York Street on the south side of Queen and would not have touched Osgoode Hall. The western entrance would have been on the lawn in front of Campbell House on the northwest corner, but that's a much more recent, the trees there are much more recent because Campbell House is there much more recently, as opposed to taking the park for beside Osgoode Hall. The other thing, the reason I showed the proposal for the park converting the east side of University Avenue into parkland is that if this work, even if you leave the station where Metrolinx plans to put it, if the redesign of University Avenue were incorporated in the project, then you have more surface space because you can now use more of the east side of the existing University Avenue rather than encroaching into the Osgoode Hall lands to put a new entrance into Osgoode Station. This entrance, the entrance building is intended to replace, there's currently a stairway that goes down from the east side of University, north of Queen, right beside the Osgoode Hall fence, and it will be replaced by the new entrance building that will be in the Osgoode Hall Park. So there's a couple of ways to address what to do with Osgoode Hall. Whether Metrolinx wants to do it is another matter because it's a substantial change either way.
Someone is raising a code issue at Sherbourne that they might not be two entrances / exits.
Yeah, this has come up in several of the discussions of Sherbourne Station, that they're only showing one exit at the east end of the station. And Metrolinx has been asked about it, and I mean, I've asked them and other people have. They say that the way they've done the design, they meet fire code. And the only way I can assume this happens is that they essentially have two completely separate paths out of the station that happen to both come out at the same place at Sherbourne Street, but that they're physically independent so that you can't have smoke getting from like if you've got a fire at one end of the station, you've still got an alternate exit. The reason there is no exit at the west end is it would conflict with the Department of National Defense Armories lands at the west end of the station box. But this is one of these things where I'm waiting to see the detailed EA has not yet been published by Metrolinx, and I'm waiting to see the detailed design for Sherbourne Station, the Moss Park Station, to see exactly how they plan to have two distinct paths to the surface from the station with only one surface building the way it's shown on their plans.
Can we talk about technology? And I want to have a sub question. Technology as in someone is saying, why does every new line need a new technology or standard? And about this concern, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, the Ontario line is going to be constructed under our condo as well, and the first thing you think of is construction and vibration, and I'm from the industry, so I'm not a NIMBY in any way. Can you talk a little bit about that? And you can even talk about it as a concern from the community, not necessarily the details of the technology itself.
Okay, the Metrolinx proposal, a point that they have made, first of all, the tunnel will be very deep underground in bedrock, much deeper than the existing subway. So there are locations where, I mean, if you live in the East End, anywhere along Strathmore Boulevard, you can stand on Strathmore Boulevard and feel the subway rumbling along because it's only like 20 feet down from the surface. The Ontario line will be much further down, 40 meters down in some places, and in bedrock. And Metrolinx intends to build it with sound insulation between the track structure and the actual tube. This is a style of construction that has already been used on places like the Spadina subway and parts of the North Yonge subway. No, I take that back. The North Yonge subway was not built that way. The Spadina subway was the first one that used it. What's called a floating slab technique, where basically the whole track structure sits on slabs, which are in turn on rubber pucks. People who know concert halls like Kerner Hall or the Canadian Opera Company building at University in Queen are much larger versions of the same thing, where actually it's a building within a building, where the concert hall sits on big rubber pucks, mechanically isolated from the surrounding. And that's the reason you can't hear the subway in either Kerner Hall or Osgoode. Now, it remains to be seen how successful they'll be. There has been, like, the Eglinton line will open. Well, we can even have test trains along it these days. And it will be interesting if any vibration is detectable, because it uses the same kind of isolated slab technique. But we're certainly in a position where very soon we'll know how far, if anywhere, vibration from a deep underground tunnel travels. Certainly long in advance of construction of the Ontario line, the Eglinton line can in fact be the guinea pig to say, see, it works. Metrolinx has already used some of the Spadina line, the extension up through York University as an example, also where it goes under Sherlock Hall. I think it really depends on, once there's something running under a neighborhood and people can say, yeah, I can't hear it, then Metrolinx will be in a position to sort of send up the fireworks and say, we can do this. But that's the situation with noise and vibration for the underground section.
Okay, thank you. That is all the time we have for questions. It's noon anyway. Thank you, Steve. That was fantastic. I'm just, not just from the responses, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Again, the recording is on my YouTube channel, and the article and the deck and the recording, I guess Steve will upload to his blog as an article later today. And I put here, let me put the link to your blog just one more time in case people don't want to scroll up. Here it is. Thank you again. Next week, we have a conversation with Leslie Wu from Civic, the CEO of Civic Action, I should say. Steve, thank you again. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.